This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Martin Babinec. He founded the Silicon Valley-based TriNet in 1988, CEO for the first 20 years, and chairman until 2010. Still on the board, very involved. This truly is the entrepreneurial success story. TriNet's core to help 14,000 small to mid-sized companies with all kinds of services, HR, payroll, etc. An absolutely really cool model that Martin developed. How big have they grown to? $4 billion in sales and listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And I'm lucky today to speak with Martin about his new book, More Good Jobs, an entrepreneur's action plan to create change in your community. If we could all develop this entrepreneurial mindset, this mindset that Martin walked into and developed himself, we would all have a much better life and community. Without any big buildup, let's jump right in and learn from someone who's lived it and walked it. I always enjoy these entrepreneurial conversations. If I could have them every day, I would. So if you ever have any good ideas for me, good people I should talk to like Martin, feel free to drop me an email. Now let's jump right into my conversation with Martin Babinec and discuss a little entrepreneurism. Where did you have the first taste, the first experience of that entrepreneurial feeling? What was it? And describe that feeling. Place me there.
I grew up in a family with 7 kids, 6 siblings. My dad was a factory worker. My mom, who was a school teacher, but then with the number of kids, she had to really be full-time stay-at-home mom. There wasn't a lot going around in terms of, there wasn't a lot of financial resources in the family. With 5 sisters, just me and my brother as the only guys, I always felt I wanted to do what I could to help my family. I started doing stuff in terms of different ways to earn whatever money I wanted. It was up to me rather than look for my parents to help because there was a lot of need in the family. I never thought about that as being an entrepreneur. I just was doing what I could to make ends meet and help my family. So that's not unusual. But to fast forward and say, where is it that my focus shifted into being an entrepreneur? That really came into play after college. I worked for about 11 years for the US government as a civilian for the Navy. And most of that time, and moving around to different locations, the majority of my time was spent outside the US. It was a wonderful experience, first in Japan and then in Europe, southern Italy to be exact. You can't find 2 more opposite places on the planet than Japan and southern Italy. I had my last assignment with that organization. It was in the San Francisco Bay Area. As soon as I got to the Bay Area, I worked really hard to get another job because I was already done working for the government, and nobody would hire me because I had spent too much time working for the government. I felt like I had a label slapped on my forehead that said good for government use only. After a solid 2 years of looking around, I finally got the message. I wasn't going to find the right opportunity because people were not valuing what I could bring to the table. And that put me back on this path of looking at opportunities where I would have a little more control over my destiny. And it was not with a goal to create a big company. I just wanted to have a small business.
What's really interesting about the 2 things that you've said, growing up with the family that had some hard times, you have to push, and then you kind of flip it, being in the government for a long time, having some success inside that system. But then it's also another one of those things where Society is kind of saying, we don't want what you have. So again, but from a different angle, you're kind of being forced into a situation. Whereas if I flipped both of those stories on their head and you grew up in a middle-class family and you were well off, maybe something would have been different. Or if you would have been with the government for a long time and somebody would have just hired you right out of the gate and would not have questioned your government time, maybe you never would have gone the direction of a TriNet or whatnot.
There is no question that the lack of success in my finding a job once I landed in the Bay Area is something I've thought a lot and shared with my family, how different our lives would have been had the right corporate role opened up for me at that point in time. No question about it. Our lives as a family would have been different.
Isn't that just crazy how those things can happen? Now you have enough age and experience to look back and realize, well, okay, if you would have understood the entrepreneurial direction without having to have those things happen to you, you could have made certain decisions. In hindsight, you can look at that, but it's interesting to imagine like, wow, if not but, right?
So I am a lucky man.
Let me ask you a question just as a setup, and we can take this out if it's unrelated, but I'm guessing upstate New York, the type of business that ultimately TriNet was, were you a competitor to Paychex? I've had the founder of Paychex on this podcast.
Well, I know Tom Golisano. Remember, TriNet did not start in upstate New York. I'm living in my hometown. I spent 25 years living elsewhere before boomeranging back here, but started TriNet in the Bay Area. It was my good fortune of starting my first company in the most entrepreneur supporting place on the planet that made all the difference.
You were a handful of years though, because let's say the AOL discs started rolling out in 94, Netscape going public in 95, but 1988 was when TriNet started, correct?
Correct. Even the early years pre World Wide Web as we know it today, Silicon Valley was a place where there was openness and receptivity, and very importantly, a pay it forward outlook that made all the difference. Because when we started TriNet, the initial focus was to be a professional employer organization, which is essentially what TriNet is. It's a type of business that depends on economies of scale to exist, which as a rookie entrepreneur, when I first opened the doors, I didn't know very much about business models. I didn't know anything about sales and marketing. I knew a lot about HR, human resources, because that was my background. I believed fervently small to mid-sized companies would be competing more with large companies for best talent. So I could kind of look into the future. I do spend time thinking about trends and where things are going. And even back then, I believed that with more digital technology, which in the late 80s and early 90s was starting to come on, that there would be opportunities in smaller companies that would take advantage of that to create businesses. Those small companies would be competing with the big corporations for talent. So the very nature of the business that TriNet started in aggregating lots of small companies into one group would leverage those macroeconomic trends. I believed in that. The problem was when I began, started selling just to any small business, we were a resounding failure. We were about to go out of business. This was not an overnight success. It was only as we're kind of going down and trying to find ways to keep the company, this tiny company afloat, that I rethought the business model, or at least I went through an analysis to decide who is the right type of customer to focus on based on the value proposition that we had. And I made the decision to focus all of our marketing efforts. I was a one-person sales and marketing department, put all of my energy looking only at emerging growth technology companies as our exclusive customer. One of the reasons I came to the conclusion was not only because of the value proposition, but as soon as I started talking to these companies, going out into the community, I found in that audience a pay it forward attitude on the part of the entrepreneurs, the seasoned entrepreneurs that were emerging tech. And again, this is all before World Wide Web. I could walk into let's say a networking meeting of some kind, the Silicon Valley Association of Startup Entrepreneurs, as an example, not know anybody in the room as I describe this type of service that no one has ever heard of, because you couldn't say HR and outsourcing in the same sentence and have people understand what you were saying. Instead of the small businesses that I had been trying to sell the prior 18 months, the response when they first heard this type of service that was sounding very strange to them, they'd say, well, just come back later when you're big. Whereas in Silicon Valley, entrepreneurs and people in that community would say, well, that's interesting. I don't need that, but maybe I can introduce you to my friend Bob over here because he's scaling up and he needs some help with the kind of stuff that you're talking about. That's an example of community in a way that supports what entrepreneurs, especially with people that have an innovation that is not broadly understood or embraced by their market. That's the difference between success. And in my case, if I had tried to start TriNet in upstate New York with what I knew back then, I surely would have failed. Surely.
But it's pretty clear now with your newest book that I happen to have in my possession, you're taking that early experience, the experience that's gone on now over multiple decades, but you're taking that early experience of support and community and saying, well, gosh, this is really fantastic. What's come to exist in Silicon Valley for so long, and not unlike Brad Feld out in Colorado, you're saying, hey, this should be a model that groups of entrepreneurs in whatever city, Saigon, you name it, should be taking this model and thinking about it. If you're stuck out there on an island all by yourself, it's tough sledding. But if you got so-called friends and family entrepreneurs around you, you actually got a chance.
For sure. To maybe put a little more depth on that, it was in 1999 when we actually moved my family from Silicon Valley to my hometown of Little Falls, New York. And at that point, we were trying to take TriNet public at the height of the dot-com era, which is another long story, but that did not work out according to plan. But the original plan was, hey, I was going to commute cross country for maybe 18 months, 2 years, and then hand the CEO reins over to someone else. But as we went through the transition from the dot-com era, where we were riding that wave of growth, to the dot-bomb era, because in the year 2000, things changed rather dramatically. And by the time we got out on our roadshow in October of 2000, nobody wanted to make an investment in a public company that had 99% of the revenue coming from dot-com customers, because by October of 2000, that was a bad story. So we aborted the IPO in 2000, and I spent the next 8 years commuting as the CEO and 2 years commuting as the chairman. I was effectively commuting for 10 years cross country. In the course of that long period, I spent a lot of time thinking about the difference between my two valleys, the Mohawk Valley, where I am today, all that I had learned not only in Silicon Valley, but the nature of what TriNet does and how we're a national company, and even then had offices in about 6 places where there were a lot of tech companies. Boulder, Colorado was one of them, which, as you've interviewed Brad, you know about that story of the growth of Boulder from a community that is a nice college town, but not a mecca for tech companies when he moved there in 1995. As a result of his moving there and my knowing him before he moved there, we opened a TriNet office because I believed Brad Feld was going to change Boulder, and he did, which is also an illustration of how one guy can make a difference. Commuting back and forth, thinking about the difference between my two valleys, recognizing that across upstate New York, we have all the right attributes, more than 100 colleges and universities that collectively enroll about 500,000 college students, the largest concentration of STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, largest concentration of STEM programs as a region of any place in the country. More than $3 billion a year in corporate and academic research going on in upstate New York. There's a lot of wealth. There's money that has been made here because this was a powerhouse in the industrial era. In fact, at one time was a powerhouse of innovation in the early 1900s, where these companies like GE, IBM, Kodak, Xerox, Corning, Bausch and Lomb, I could go on and on. These are all companies that started here in upstate New York. Tons of wealth was made by not only these companies, but others. We have close proximity to the capital markets in New York City, with many of our best and brightest leaving upstate to now work on Wall Street and other places. We got both personal and institutional ties. You put all that together, you'd think upstate New York should be a powerhouse of innovation today. We should be creating tens of thousands of startup companies.
Just to clarify, the commuting was simply because you relocated the family to upstate New York, but the business was still based in the Bay Area.
Correct. I wasn't commuting every week, but yes, I'm the CEO of a large company that was going in reverse. We aborted an IPO and the company is now declining in revenue as rapidly as in the second half of the 90s we were growing.
It's almost like a third pivot that randomly kind of hit you, a commuting. It's at a different stage of your life, but this commuting process stirs another pivot.
Yes, and that's a personal pivot.
It became a professional pivot as well, though, right?
Yes, in the sense that I spent a lot of time thinking about how would I want to affect change? What change did I really want to do? Because I knew I wasn't going to commute forever. I mean, that's crazy. I made the decision to move here for family reasons. It all worked out. Our family has done well, I'm pleased to say. In fact, we had the whole family sequestered together for COVID. I mean, it was great. We have 3 adult children, and they decided to come here and sequester with us. Family has done really well together. No regrets, albeit it was very difficult as a dad to be away as much as I was, yet still maintain a good, healthy relationship as a dad and a husband.
To set the stage for the audience, though, too, because we've not talked specifically about it, but TriNet.
I'm not involved in operating the business on the management team, but I'm the largest non-institutional shareholder, and I'm on the board of directors. It's not an insignificant role of a public company.
The reason I set that up is I want people to understand from this small one-man sales position that you describe early on, to get to the 2019 numbers that I pulled up as a publicly traded company, $3.9 billion in revenue, 3,000 plus employees. This is quite an accomplishment. There's not many people that get a chance to see that perspective that you have. I want people to understand this because as we start to open this up to a wider conversation as to why Martin can give this perspective about entrepreneurial communities, I want people to understand what your foundation is.
It's been a journey and one that I still enjoy being on today. There's no question that it's not only the journey of building a company and being surrounded by really smart people who were very committed and have done a lot to make that happen, but the very nature of what TriNet does has an impact. The work lives today, I mean, we service 15,000 companies and 350,000 employees. It's a huge operation. It's complex, and yet we have a lot of impact on people's lives by how we do not just the administrative stuff of payroll and benefits, but how we help companies manage their human capital and run their workplaces and treat their employees with respect. It's a mission that I feel very proud of to have had that impact, and one that continues, I hope, for many, many years as an independent company.
Before we got cut off, you were mentioning about you being in Vietnam for an entrepreneurial event early 2020. Let's open this up to your desire, your thinking about building the entrepreneurial communities, because I talk to a lot of people. I don't know if you try to put numbers on this. You've got this interesting different pivots that happened in your life, and the next thing you know, you're going down this entrepreneurial path. I don't know how many people from the government potentially make the same pivot that you made. I don't know how many people in this day and age wake up and something happens and they really go the entrepreneurial direction. It does happen a lot in Vietnam, for example. But speak to this big picture idea of being an entrepreneur. Where are we today? Is it something, if you were to look back to 1988, does it feel like people in their 20s and 30s, 40s, whatnot, are willing to go that direction? Or does it feel like something else? Does it feel like there's less and less entrepreneurs? I mean, a guy like Elon Musk, he controls a big share of the pie. A guy like Jeff Bezos, he controls a big share of the pie. Are people feeling like there's still opportunity? Or are people feeling more like, gosh, I don't know if the opportunity is there as much?
From my vantage point, the entrepreneurial spirit is stronger than ever. And that's for a variety of reasons. Number one, the barriers to entry to be an entrepreneur have never been lower. I could argue that is globally, and it is because of how the internet has democratized the access to both information and markets. Even compared to, let's say, the late 90s, early part of this century, the cost of being able to put something together and have an offering that would even be internet deployed was very high. Today, there are so many things that can be done at such a low cost. Anyone that has the right idea can find ways to build a following, even build distribution without having to make a big capital investment. You bundle that low barrier to entry along with the ability to find supporters and team members to join you, build your own little community. The opportunities are there, and people are inspired by role models. Elon Musk would be an outlier, but for every Elon Musk, there's 10,000 others that have done remarkably well and may not be brand names, but there are so many of them that most everybody knows some successful entrepreneurs that perhaps are not broadly publicized, but have done very well. The whole notion of today being a serial entrepreneur and starting a company, growing it, selling it, and then starting another company is not uncommon. You could go back to the 80s and say that was pretty rare. All right. Yes, it happened, but it was pretty rare. I am absolutely of the belief that the opportunities are there, the interest level is there, and the biggest barriers, from my perspective, are sometimes driven within the political climate, the regulatory environment, by country, also by the cultural elements. Cultural elements include to what extent are the successful entrepreneurs actually helping the next generation. As we said earlier in the interview, I was the recipient of a very entrepreneur supporting community. As soon as I made the decision to sell to emerging tech instead of the general small business community, my opportunities at TriNet completely changed. Because then in selling to the emerging tech community, these were folks, including experienced entrepreneurs, that were ready to embrace new ideas and help me as a rookie entrepreneur, even though they didn't know me. Now, in Vietnam, in many Asian countries, and in many places, even in the US, even in upstate New York, an aspiring entrepreneur can walk into a room of strangers, strike up a conversation, maybe have something interesting to offer. Someone who is in a position to help that entrepreneur could be thinking about it in their mind, but saying, well, I don't know if I want to introduce this rookie to one of my friends or valued contacts, because if it doesn't work out, it could be a bad reflection on me making the referral. That's a cultural issue. So when I embarked on this mission to say, how could I change the regional economy of virtually a state? I mean, let's say New York City is in a completely different situation. I can describe if you're interested, but upstate is so opposite. And we have so many issues to overlook all those attributes that I mentioned earlier, that we should be a powerhouse of innovation, that we're not. This was intellectually a big challenge. Hey, what can one guy do to change not just a community, but a region? All right. That's the path that I've been on. It begins with trying to affect a cultural change. And that's kind of what the book is about. It helps describe not only the need for changing the ethos, really developing relationships so that we find a tribe of people who share these values and understand that by changing our outlook on how we think about helping those that are starting companies, including people that don't know anything about emerging tech, people that are real estate developers or attorneys, accountants, people that you'd think if they never had exposure, their initial reaction is to say, well, I don't understand how things work in these new kind of companies, so therefore I'm not going to get engaged. And yet, when you have these communities that don't have a lot of success yet in taking people who have these innovative ideas and are trying to start and grow, if they can't get support from their community, then they're going to uproot and they're going to move to places like Silicon Valley, New York City, Boston, or elsewhere where they do have the supportive community. The difference between magnet cities like those that I've mentioned, and Boulder now would be another example of a magnet city where people move from upstate New York to go to Boulder to start a company, versus what I call a talent exporting community, of which we have several in upstate New York. Smart people coming into the area to go to these 100 plus colleges and universities. They are here for that period of time. They get ideas. They actually want to start a company, but they don't find enough support in the community, so they leave. The data shows that in the category of people that were on visas, because this is trackable, we lose a huge percentage, more than 80%, that relocate in, go through these programs, then they leave to 4 cities: New York City, Boston, Washington, D.C. metro area, and the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area.
So I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, 15 miles outside D.C. in Virginia in Fairfax County. This is a hotbed of government activity, government employees, whatnot, guaranteed jobs, guaranteed salaries. 6 of the wealthiest counties in the country surround D.C. There's a lot of government activity there. I would not really give credit to the local politicians in that particular area. And I'm going to open this up wider because ultimately you're talking about Boulder. We brought up Brad. We're talking about upstate New York yourself. I would argue that the directions you're going with people outside of elected politicians, because ultimately a lot of these elected politicians across the country don't necessarily have grand skill sets. They don't necessarily have grand experiences. Politicians are politicians. Their jobs are often to get elected. I really like the idea. I love the idea, in fact, of entrepreneurs coming into communities. And of course, you're going to have to deal with politicians to get things done. But the leadership coming from entrepreneurs rings a lot more true with me than it does thinking we should be waiting for our elected leaders to make good decisions because they will supposedly know what to do. I just don't think that rings so true. I think it's the individuals outside of that elected world that are often bringing the spark. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. In fact, the areas that have the highest rates of job growth are also the cities with the highest rates of job growth, or the cities that also have the highest rates of what we call innovation economy companies, companies that are developing a product or service that's aimed at a national or global audience, and it's based on an innovation. Cities that are growing the most number of jobs in that category have the strongest and fastest growing economies of metro areas around the US. And if you look at them, many of them are in areas that are even high tax and high regulatory. Boston, New York City. I mean, California, do you think the California government is responsible for Silicon Valley's success? Or you think a Bay Area?
Of course not.
You know what I mean? There's a place for public policy to be supportive. Don't get me wrong. There is a political side of things that I also get involved with. It's a different hat. I could really talk about that. But the thrust of the book is to not really worry so much about the government and to follow through on exactly what you said. And that is the entrepreneurs are the ones that can change the landscape, particularly those that are already experienced and really care about their community. They know they want to make a change. They want to have an impact on their community. And oftentimes they get frustrated because of the government, or maybe they become a volunteer board member of nonprofits and they get frustrated with that because that just kind of seems so slow. They just go out and start another company because that's what they know how to do. A few entrepreneurs banding together and start to spread this ethos of we need to have a little bit of coordination so that we can help the next generation of entrepreneurs, maybe centralize some resources to spread the awareness of how to bring people together so that the tribe can expand. That's kind of the basic concept. From starting with just in 2010, my partner for this opportunity is the nonprofit we created is called Upstate Venture Connect. And the CEO of Upstate Venture Connect is Nasser Ali. We began that together, just him and me. Everything I'm describing here was a concept. Today, 2020, we have 16,000 people that are connected to our nonprofit in one way or another, spread across 7 different metro areas, making up Upstate New York. And the challenge is, it's not that we've arrived and so we can say we're now successful. No, we've built a following, and it's a journey to keep increasing the connectivity so that through this network, people can reach across geographic boundaries and reach across and bust through institutional silos so that an entrepreneur in one city who's looking for a particular kind of help, be it capital, access to a market, access to a corporate relationship, team members, whatever they need, that we can increase the likelihood of their finding the resource they need through this broader network. That's the journey we're on.
Before we were connected, I was unfamiliar with you or your story. To me, it's not a positive thing. Now, that's not to say everybody should know about your story, but I brought up Elon Musk earlier, and you said he's an outlier. And I thought to myself, there was a reason I brought up his name too before you. A guy like that so dominates the discussion. I wonder how healthy that is for fellow entrepreneurs to be lionizing and only thinking about it and only talking about it. And this is somewhat a media problem too. This central focus on Mark Zuckerberg or the Google guys or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. We've gotten very fixated on these couple guys that really are truly fantastic stories, fantastic outliers, but there's so much more because ultimately we all need to think about the bell curve. No one wakes up and ultimately plans a life where they're going to make $1 billion. There's a lot of luck involved there, but there's not necessarily a lot of luck involved. There's a lot less luck involved where, okay, maybe over the course of a lifetime, you build a company that generates you, not you, but anybody, they make 7 figures or they make 5 million or 10 million. Do you think sometimes we've gotten a little too preoccupied with the folks that have made 150 billion versus being a little more down to earth?
My response there is it's more of a media issue than anything else. And yes, the media influences a broader population, but within the circles that I'm involved with, which are broad, because it's not just upstate New York, it's not just Silicon Valley. I cast a wide net within the different entrepreneurial organizations that I'm affiliated with. We don't spend time talking about Elon Musk. There's a healthy recognition that success for entrepreneurs is not looked at, well, I'm going to be the next Steve Jobs. No, I mean, entrepreneurs that are really out there doing things are generally more grounded in what it is they're trying to do, how they're going about it, while their visions about what they're going to achieve will vary. I can't think of very many people that I've ever met. I'm talking thousands, probably more than maybe 10,000 entrepreneurs. I've been doing this 30 years. And I don't think I've had more than a couple of people that were real entrepreneurs that I've run across that expressed this vision of, well, I'm building $1 billion company, building a $100 billion company. That's a media thing, not an entrepreneur thing. All right, is what I'm trying to say.
No, it's a great perspective. I think one of the most recent cases that got all the media attention was the WeWork situation that unfolded. But you're right. I guess you are in this great situation that you've helped to build all these different connections with all these different people. I'm a little bit outside that particular world, but I do see the media does drive a lot in America these days. I take what you say and I listen carefully. I do sometimes wonder how much the media, for good or bad, is driving things. I guess that's ultimately something that can be debated forever in America. I want to talk about time leverage. This is something that I've had a chance to learn over many years. I put my first website up in 1996. I was accepting payments online for products in 1997. So I've had this great experience to live this, and it's been the way that I've paid for my life since. I've learned that time leverage aspect. There's nothing quite like the feeling of perhaps making money when you're asleep. It's such a great feeling, ultimately. That's not any kind of a lazy statement or anything. It's just, how does one leverage time? When did you first start thinking about the leverage of your time?
When I began that journey I mentioned earlier of looking around at entrepreneurial opportunities as I was not employable in the corporate world, that's when I started thinking about time leverage in the manner that you're thinking of. Because with the background I had, the kind of businesses people were starting that were HR professionals were all consulting businesses. I looked at that model and said, it doesn't make sense to start a business that's based on the billable hour. And that caused me to just rethink, well, what are the opportunities for which my business would not be based on my own time, because I relate to that concept of time leverage.
Could have made that decision, though. You could have
I could have
made that decision to go billable hours, and maybe you would have built a nice business, but it never would have got to where you are today.
And it's not that I had that ambition to do what we have done. I wanted to have a successful small business, but even as a successful small business, I wanted to, as you have mentioned, have that feeling that I could take vacation and the cash register would still be ringing while I was on vacation with my family. I didn't want to be beholden to the billable hour because of time leverage. That's what put me on this path to keep looking at different types of opportunities within the field of HR. And when I stumbled across what was then the emergence of this industry today known as professional employer organizations, it was a no-brainer once I understood it. But let me fast forward and say that today I look at time leverage in a different way. That absolutely was my first exposure, and that examination of time leverage from a business model perspective still makes sense. But at the stage of my life now where for me, it's not about the economics, the thing that I care most about with regards to time leverage is recognizing that time is my non-renewable asset. Once it's spent, I ain't never getting it back. I have a wide range of opportunities where I could be spending my time. I don't have to worry about the economics of it. Today, I really think harder about time leverage from a relationship standpoint. When I decide what are the initiatives I'm going to put my time in, it is thinking through, how do I get leverage out of that particular initiative that may help more than one of the things that I work on. Every one of those things, I'm making decisions about where do I want to put my time. When I go through an evaluation of an opportunity, I'm always thinking about, is the relationship I'm going to have with this person that I'm going to invest some time in, could it end up helping me in more than one of my initiatives? And if I find one relationship that would help not just in two of my initiatives, but maybe in three or four, I also have a lot of stuff going on and helping my local community, as an example, then it becomes a no-brainer. That's how you get time leverage, is having that single hour of time that you might spend in developing a relationship help in multiple ways.
Let me ask you, with all this experience, just this really varied career, when you meet people and you need to assess people for the first time, what are some of those internal heuristics, internal hacks that you use to help you to better understand the person that you're dealing with for the first, second, or third time? What can we take away from you in terms of coming to a better understanding of how to judge other people? Because you just described a situation where you want to bring people into your world, into your life, and you want to be able to have those many interests in your career leverage out. So if you make the wrong choice, that can be a real time drain too. What are some of the ways that you've learned about choosing the right people?
When we think about growing the tribe, who are the people that are going to work within this environment and help us advance on the goals we have, we essentially have a profile that describes the attributes of those people. And those include things, not surprisingly, like we want people that are, by their actions, demonstrating they give more than they take, because we're all takers and givers. We all have that mixture of, we want to be recipients of other people's help. All of us have some amount that we're helping others ourselves. But where does the needle point in the aggregate? Are you more of a giver or are you more of a taker? In answer to your question, when I'm speaking with people and I'm making a judgment, is this somebody I'm going to invest time to further the relationship? Part of what I do is assess, where does the needle fall on those two dimensions for that person? And when we get the right signals of being more of a giver, Brad Feld in Techstars model of give first, when we see evidence of someone who gives first without an expectation of getting a return because they're paying it forward, those things attract attention. And when they are doing that, not just with their words, but by their actions, and we can see their level of engagement in a community and their care and concern for trying to improve the community, there's some alignment. And when they are asking questions about trying to understand some of the things that we're hashing out here, even in this interview, then their curiosity, their interest in things that maybe they didn't know much about emerging tech, and how are these companies created, and how can it be done in a place like Upstate, and why don't we have more of these companies being created here? Those are all good signals that matter.
Let me get and there's no one size fits all here. There's no one perfect shoe size. I know that. But from your perspective, somebody, a young person, they want to go down the path of an innovation economy, either creating a business or a job with a startup, whatnot. What's the kind of foundation that a young person should think about pursuing? Okay, most people are going to finish high school. Some of our most famous entrepreneurs, some of those outliers, never finished college. Is there a optimal path from your perspective? Because, I mean, look, you got a pretty twisty, turny journey. A lot of things happen. You kind of just follow the Bayesian path, and then the next thing you know, something interesting happens. But what kind of a foundation would you recommend for young people? And maybe even expand that out to maybe people get to be later on in life, their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and they want to make a pivot. What are some of the foundations that people should be thinking about?
To boil down to a couple of key points that we can close with, I would say in terms of what makes me different, I have mentioned I spend a little bit of time thinking about where the world is going, ideas behind understanding economics and trends, and doing a lot of reading about what's going on, not only in my own world, but kind of the broader world. That's influenced a lot of decisions that I've made on where I decided to put my time. I try to skate out ahead of the puck kind of thing. But then the other thing that probably makes me different is that I'm a real believer that my success has been really due to being proactive in continually expanding the network of relationships that I have. And we all meet lots of people all the time, and then have to make conscious decisions about where are we going to invest additional time after we've met someone to keep a relationship alive. The longer we're around and have relationships that are now over decades, then people that we might have had a strong relationship at one point, then just kind of filters off because there hasn't been a conscious effort on either or both parties to keep it alive. I've really concentrated on trying to look for ways to keep extending the network and cultivating relationships. No one can start and grow a company on their own without the help of a lot of other people. As I've mentioned, I was the beneficiary of being in the most entrepreneur supporting place on the planet still today. I would still say Silicon Valley is head and shoulders above any other place for the reasons that I've mentioned. I've tried to take those lessons, spread the ethos of a magnet city, of how it works, so that it could be replicated in places today that are not doing so. Ultimately, that is about getting entrepreneurs connected to the resources they need by their realizing they're not going to get to where they want to go without personal relationships helping them. So even in this digital age, we have a tendency to think, especially the millennial generation, that they can meet anybody they need to over the keyboard. They can start a new relationship, anybody they need to. While it's true, there are examples of that, including marriages that are happening as a result of the dating sites, et cetera. Yes, that can happen. Most of us would, including, I got 3 kids aged 28 to 31, their relationships, the most significant relationships in their life, came about through the one of 2 very traditional paths. They either bumped into somebody in what we call in the book a creative collision, and then developed that relationship over time to the point that someone maybe they met in a creative collision then referred them, which is a second path, a referral by trusted source. And most of our important relationships come to us through one of those 2 paths. Bumping into somebody, cultivating relationships, eventually that person refers you to a high value resource. I'm trying to suggest earlier in your career and you really want to be successful, it's being thoughtful about the continual expansion of your network and keeping in touch with people that once you recognize that there's a fit, there's an alignment between someone you've met, you don't want to let it die. It's incumbent on at least one of the 2 parties to have that desire to continue cultivating the relationship. A resource that I would recommend, also indicated in the book, is a fantastic, easy read called Meet 100 People. And you would get it on the website, meet100people.com. And it's written for a millennial audience and gives very practical guidance on how you go about not only starting your network, but cultivating it and keeping it alive. I hope if any of the things that I've said here today are of value and interest to others, visit the moregoodjobs.org website and join our community, because that's where we are going to continue to start populating and really spreading this around and getting more people connected through the very ideas we've been talking about.
I couldn't agree with you any more about the bumping into part. It's something that's so undervalued, but we would not be talking right now today if not for both of us bumping into other people that ultimately led to you and I bumping into each other.
Exactly.
It's all one big bump into.
Yes, exactly. And I got a post coming out on my blog about Tony Hsieh, who, as you know, passed away and got on some press. And this was a guy that had a lot of impact on my view about this bumping into people. He took that to a science in his downtown project in Las Vegas, Fremont East neighborhood.
Listen, the book for the audience out there, More Good Jobs, an Entrepreneur's Action Plan to Create Change in Your Community. Today, the point with my podcast is not to necessarily take an author down the bullet point. I want to let people see your personality, let them see, understand you. And ultimately, what I find is once guests express themselves very well, which you do, if people like you, they go and check the book out. That seems to be the best way. I have found over the many years of doing this podcast and talking to everybody under the sun. Just get people having a nice conversation, let them express their life philosophy, and then ultimately the listeners kind of say, oh, I'll bet he's codified a lot of that in his book, which is often true.
You're a great host, Mike. I so appreciate your inviting me to be on your show.
Hey, I appreciate it too, Martin. Where's the main website we can send people to?
moregoodjobs.org. You can actually leave a note. It will get to me directly. Lots of ways that I can get people connected through that More Good Jobs network.
When you make it back to Vietnam, dinner on me, because I know you're going to come back.
I absolutely will take you up on that.
Okay.
So looking forward. And should your travels bring you to upstate New York, I would want you to let me know. Love to have you here.
Okay, sounds great. Hey, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for all your insights.
All right. Thanks so much.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash, or just trying to make a lot of money? Trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.